So the thing I find most interesting about these particular speeches is I would imagine that in the seats that you guys are sitting right now, you're probably wondering what kind of speech is going to be that I'm going to give. Am I going to give a hilarious romp that will send you guys home laughing, busting your guts, or will I say something thoughtful, something thought-provoking that all of you on your rides home will find yourself sticking with you for possibly years to come? And as an entertainer, I like to be an honest person, and I want to be very clear about what I'm trying to say. And what I will say is this is a speech that I'm making just as much for you guys as I am for me, and one that I've wanted and needed to tell for a long time. Over the course of the next several minutes, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. One of which is going to introduce you to who I am and the kind of stuff that I do. One of which is going to introduce you to my struggles with anxiety, with mental illness, and how that led to the worst day of my life. And then I'm going to tell you a completely true story about how the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers saved my life. So for the guys who don't know me personally, my name is Ken Johnson. I am what I refer to most people as a Saturday morning scholar. What I mean by that is that a great deal of the creative projects that I work on and the stuff that I do involve the idea of looking at something that seems as childish as Saturday morning cartoons and trying to express the idea that no matter what medium you're working in, that you can find something deeper, something more tangible, something that will stick with you and be just as important as any other project you would work on from other quote-unquote more adult or more sophisticated mediums. And I want you to keep that idea in mind when several minutes from now I wrap around to the Power Rangers thing. So, although Power Rangers is the one I've mentioned so far, my main first nerd love has always been Batman. And how that started was back when I was in high school. A friend of mine named Adam Miller, one of those popular guys in school, was working for the school newspaper at the time. And he decided that he was working on an article of the idea of like who would want to fight Batman v Superman, or like which one's cooler, all this kind of stuff. And he just walks up to me and he says, "Hey, you know a lot about comic book stuff, right? You know a lot about Batman. Can you give us a quote for this thing?" In all honesty, I really didn't know in particular too much more about Batman. I guess I just kind of gave that vibe overall. But like I said, it's like this popular guy in school, and I'm not a person who, gets along with many people. I'm a hard person to get along with because of stuff I'll get into a little bit later in the speech. But I didn't want to disappoint him, so I just pulled something out of my ass out of nowhere and tried to come up with something wax poetic about the relationship between Superman and Batman and all that stuff. And sure enough, they got posted. Years later, I took that, when I actually did become a major Batman fan, and I created 2 specific projects that have defined my life. The first of which is a project called The Man Who Watched Batman. It is, to this date, the most in-depth analysis of the 1990s Batman show known to man on the planet. The other of which is a comic called Corpse Corp, which is the story based partially off of myself about a character who specifically deals with mental illness and attention deficit disorder. For those of you guys who do not know me personally, I struggle myself with attention deficit disorder, which, to be able to word the phrase, "I suffer from a mental illness known as attention deficit disorder," may not sound like a lot, but for a person who has it or a person who's been through my specific experiences, putting that specific sentence into words and saying it out loud in front of people can be an incredibly difficult thing. Because the problem most people have with attention deficit disorder is this ability to be unable to categorize it. Attention deficit disorder is a mental disability, but in most common conversations I would never refer to myself as mentally disabled or handicapped. Even terms like neuroatypical, which is typically something used by people who suffer on the autism spectrum, doesn't also quite fit into what it is. So often it comes down to a thing of me saying, well, it's not the same as this thing, but it has to be the same as something. The misconception a lot of people have is that people with attention deficit disorder think harder or that they are more intelligent than normal people. The problem isn't that we think harder, the problem is that we think faster. Not better, faster. And this is what I mean by that. For those guys who don't know, the human eyes. In your average vision, before everything is processed, the human nose is actually completely in sight all of the time. It is only because your brain is able to go through and it sees the images, notice that your nose is something that's not important, filters it out, and then you get what you actually see. The human brain works in normal thoughts in exactly the same way, where you absorb just hundreds upon thousands of different kinds of stimulus in your everyday life every single second that you see, and your brain goes through and analyzes which ones are important that you need to notice, which ones are completely just, not important. My brain doesn't do that properly. Essentially, my brain is equivalent to that kid in school that decides that everything in his textbooks is important, so he highlights everything because he thinks that'll make it easier to study. And because of that, our brains are trained to think faster, not because we're smarter, but because that is the only way that we can survive, because we have to filter through that much more information. People often use the metaphor that life is like a marathon. And so if you imagine life as a marathon, everyone else is at the starting blocks, and they are prepared and trained for a marathon, understanding the kind of pace they have to go at, the kind of endurance they have to build up, and the fact of how long the race they have in front of them has got to be. My brain, on the other hand, thinks that he is getting ready for the most important sprint race of his life. And that gun goes off when a piece of stimulus comes in front of us, just like anybody else, and we all take off the starting blocks, and I zoom out ahead of everybody else, darting in front of everyone else with just stimulus of all kinds coming left and right of every single piece of information that goes in front of you. And when you can harness that, it can be incredible. It's like having a superpower when you're able to hyperanalyze that kind of information and be able to break it down and do something with it. But the problem comes about 30 seconds after that, when everyone else is preparing for the rest of their marathon, and my brain, in what most people usually see as zoning out, is thinking about nothing. In actuality, zoning out is my brain collapsing 20 feet after the finish line, after the sprint is... For the record, I'm also asthmatic, so I'm allowed to make that joke. And so, like I said, on days where you can harness that, it can be amazing. The fact that that's your everyday becomes the most almost impossible thing. On an average day, that process might happen to you a couple times in an hour. During what people refer to as a panic attack, it can happen once every 15 to 30 seconds. So, the thing that's interesting about it, though, is how it affects your memory. Because with an inability to sort out what's important and unimportant information, you oftentimes will remember things you have no use for, but not be able to remember important things. I can't remember people's birthdays, but I can tell you all 23 seasons of Power Rangers in order. I will forget, to take the trash outside, but I can tell you the names of all 110 episodes of the Batman animated series, and if you told me any of them, I can tell you who the villain was, who wrote it, and so on and so forth. I can't remember my wife's phone number, but growing up with VeggieTales, I can tell you that the P.O. Box address to write in a postcard in that studio is P.O. Box 617-697, Chicago, Illinois, 60661. I never sent them anything. I just know that. And it won't go away. But it's not always fun and games, that kind of thing. It makes social interaction incredibly difficult. It's driven friends away. It's cost me jobs. It's cost me relationships. And in particular, led me to the worst day of my life. I was working at a convenience store, a bigger shopping store, in the meat department. And what had happened was I had a particular meat clerk I worked with was just an asshole of a man. And on a day I was already doing very, very poorly, and already feeling just like garbage, pulls me out back basically just to tell me, just to be prepared for the fact that I'm going to get fired. And this was on the day that I had, hours before, I had signed the first lease I had ever signed in my life. What he said after that will always stick with me. It's hard to see from the picture behind you, but in the second issue of the comic book, I created an image trying to represent in a psychic sense when the main character goes through a panic attack. He's surrounded by these different masks of different emotions, all screaming at him, different things in the script that were actually things that people have screamed at me in my real life regarding my anxiety. And the main one I will never forget is what he said to me. And he looked me square in the eyes and he said, "Let me guess, you're one of those psycho kids that has ADD that your parents full of slow-down pills so you don't know which way is up." It's my HR rep that told me that. The guy I'm supposed to report this shit to is the one who told me that. And I came out of that shift depressed as all hell. And I'm not much of a drinker, so I went to Family Video instead. Because I had to do something to take things off of my mind. And at this point, I figured it, like, I didn't know what else there was. You know, working on all these crazy projects is in the middle of making this book project, thought I'd probably give up on it too. There's no point in it because nobody cares about anything. Like, the fact that, you know, this dream I had of actually making an impact with these kind of media was never going anywhere. And as I'm walking through that store, this little girl walks up with her mother, pulling her arm, asking her to rent something. Her mom wants her to rent a Disney movie, but instead she says, "No, I don't want to rent a Disney movie. I want to rent Power Rangers." And the little girl asks, and the mother asks her why. And she says, "Well, I want to rent Power Rangers because they're awesome and they kick butt and they stand up for what they believe in and they're awesome. I want to be just like them because they're amazing." And that little girl didn't know at that moment, she just, in that like 30 seconds, had reaffirmed everything I'd come to believe in my life. I cried in the store. I need to restate that. I openly wept in the store. But then I grew to, pull myself together. I talked to the mother. I explained to her that, her daughter didn't have anything to worry about, and that there was good qualities to the show, and that it was something more than just constant violence and this thing and that thing. And of all the random things that my mind will randomly remember for whatever reason, that's one I'm glad I'm never going to forget. I don't know what all of you guys are going to take away from this. I don't know if you'll think it's funny. I don't know if you'll think it's heartwarming. But at the very least, as difficult as it can be for me at times, I hope that I have kept your attention. Thank you.